Practice Note webinar entitled Aspects of Construction Management for Consulting Engineers. And this is based on 3 brand new CESA practice notes. I'll be your moderator for this webinar. My name is Wally Main. I'm a civil engineer and I occupy the position of Contractual Affairs Manager at CESA. Just a quick announcement that we are planning to hold another 2 CESA best practice webinars this year, and they're tentatively scheduled for the 8th of August and the 1st of November. So please be on the lookout for them. And we'd also like to take this opportunity to bring to your attention the CESA School of Consulting Engineering and the CPD accredited training courses it offers. For details of the many training courses offered by the School of Consulting Engineering, kindly click on the training heading on the CESA website, which is www.cesa.co.za. I'd also like to inform you that the webinar is being recorded and that the presentations will be available after the webinar on the CESA website by clicking on the headings Guidelines, then Presentations. Then to access the recording of the webinar, simply go to the CESA website, click on the YouTube icon, and scroll through the recordings. Before we get started, I'd like to outline some of the house rules for our delegates or viewers. On the taskbar at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the chat and the Q&A icons. Please use the chat for any comments you may have, and the Q&A for any questions you'd like to ask the presenters. To unpack today's topics, we are very fortunate to have 3 very knowledgeable presenters joining us, for which we thank them greatly. They will each deliver their presentations, and only at the end of the webinar will there be a separate question and answer session covering all the presentations. Thereafter, the proceedings will end with some closing remarks. The first presenter will be Francis Gibbons, who will speak on the new practice note PN 96, and it's entitled The Early Termination of Construction Contracts Where Warranted. Francis is a professional engineer and an active member of both the CESA Supply Chain Management Committee and the CESA Quality Risk and Sustainability Committee. He is a semi-retired civil engineer with extensive experience and was greatly involved in the recent revision or updating of the CESA practice notes. In addition, Francis is the chairperson of the CESA practice notes subcommittee. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Francis. It's over to you, Francis.
Thank you very much, Wally, and good afternoon, everyone. It really is a privilege to be able to talk to you this afternoon. I think we've got some interesting topics, as Wally said. So I'll be talking on the early termination of construction contracts when warranted. The purpose of this practice note is to provide members with an understanding of aspects of termination of construction contracts, and in particular, the cost implications of going the dispute resolution route and not simply terminating the contract. So we have an example that as an illustration. The practice note is not a definitive guide, of course, as every case is different, but it provides an example of where terminating the contract was a better option than going a dispute resolution route. Apologies for that. Clients and their consulting engineers are often reluctant to terminate a construction contract where the contractor is not performing or is in breach. And that's really because of the implications of termination, winding up the current contract and valuing it and going through all those processes, and also then having to go through the whole procurement process again. Sometimes these situations result in prolonged disputes when you do go the dispute resolution route, which end in termination anyway, and where termination at an early stage could have resulted in a much better outcome for the client. So this practice note highlights one such case that was brought to CESA's attention when the client made a complaint. So the background to the case study is it was a standard construction contract for the construction of 1,248 meters of water pipeline, so not very big. And it was awarded by a municipal client to the contractor, with a consulting engineer obviously appointed to provide the professional services. And this was during the municipality's 2016/17 financial year. The value of the contract was 1.2 million. The pipes delivered by the contractor, I think they were ductile iron pipes, did not comply with the specification. Furthermore, the contractor had not appointed an independent inspector to inspect and approve the pipe at the manufacturing works, which was in China, and this was required in terms of the contract. A dispute arose between the contractor and the district municipality as the contractor was not prepared to replace the pipes. The municipality then wanted to terminate the contract, but was advised by the consulting engineer to rather follow a dispute process, the one outlined in the contract, which was then followed. An arbitrator ruled that the relevant clause requiring the contractor to appoint an independent inspectorate was valid. When the contractor declared it was impossible to conform to the specification, the matter went to adjudication. This is now in 2021. The adjudicator's report found that the contractor must comply with the specification, as you would expect. The contractor could meet the specification. It was not impossible to perform, and the municipality could terminate the contract. So the outcome was adjudication and arbitration costs were to be shared. So the municipality didn't even have the pleasure of giving the bill for that to the contractor. In the end, the municipality spent 4.5 million in total on legal fees. Remember, the original contract value was 1.2 million. The pipeline was still not completed 6 years later. Nothing had been done. And the client was obviously not very happy with the advice given by the consultant. So the question then arises as to whether the municipality should have rather terminated the contract at an early stage, as they wanted to, when the contractor refused to replace the pipes. So I'll just look at two of the commonly used general conditions of contract. First, the GCC 2015 and what clauses would apply. So under clause 92135 of GCC 2015, a specific provision is made for termination in the event of the contractor failing to remove plant or materials from site within 14 days after receiving from the employer's agent written notice that the said plant has been rejected by the employer's agent. So if the materials in this case are rejected, the consultant gives the contractor notice, and if he fails to remove the plant or materials from the site within 14 days, the employer may then, again, after giving the contractor further 14 days notice, terminate the contract and order the contractor to vacate the site. The termination provisions in the FIDIC Red Book are similar. In the 2017 edition, under clause 15.1, the engineer may, by issuing a notice to correct, require the contractor to make good any failure to carry out any obligation under the contract within a specified time. So this doesn't have the 14 days that the GCC has. Should the contractor not remedy the default, the employer may then, under clause 15.2.1, give 14 days notice of intention to terminate, and under clause 15.2.2, the employer may immediately terminate the contract if the contractor still does not remedy the matter by giving a second notice. The 1999 Red Book, so the first edition, is slightly different, and in fact, it's much more similar to the GCC clauses, in that there's no sort of specified period within which the contractor has to correct. It's simply the 14 days as in the GCC. So the application of the above GCC or FIDIC contract clauses can result in relatively short timeframes to effect termination. So in conclusion, consulting engineers should carefully weigh up the relative merits of following a dispute resolution path versus terminating the contract in cases where the contractor is not performing. Wally, that's the end of my talk, brief, but hopefully to the point. So I hand back to you.
Thank you, Francis. It was short, but it was sweet. And you gave us really valuable guidelines and practical pointers on the early termination of construction contracts where warranted. And just pointing out that it's not simply a choice between the two. All factors have to be weighed up. So it was enlightening, and I'm sure it will be of great value to the delegates attending this webinar. And just a reminder that Francis' presentation will be uploaded to the website. I see people asking in the chat whether the recording will be available. Yes, it will be available on the YouTube section, as I said earlier, of the CESA website. So I just want to remind the audience that CESA tries hard to empower its members with useful information or guidance through its practice notes and webinars like this one. So access to the CESA practice notes is just one of the many benefits CESA of CESA membership. Excuse me. And we encourage all consulting engineering practices to consider applying for CESA membership by contacting Ms. Gillian Wands, our membership administrator, at 011 463 2022 or email gillian@cesa.co.za. Just moving on. The second presenter will be Charles Salia, who will address us on the new CESA practice note, PN 100, entitled Managing Rain Events. Charles is a professional civil engineer and a technical director at member firm Jones and Wagner. He's an active member of the CESA Quality, Risk and Sustainability Committee. He's also a member of the CESA Practice Notes Subcommittee, and then also the MSD, or Management Systems Declaration Subcommittee. So he's very well involved at CESA. At this point, I'd like to call upon Charles to deliver his presentation, and it's over to you, Charles.
Thank you, Wally, for that kind introduction, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to present on this topic today. So as Wally said, I'm going to be talking to a brand new practice note, which CESA have just finalized, titled Managing Rain Events in Construction Projects, Contracts, Clauses, and Insurance. Sorry. So I'm just going to start with an introduction, and then I'm going to talk through how rain events are managed in the general forms of contracts, which are commonly used in South Africa. So I'll talk about GCC 2015 third edition. And then before going on to the others, I'll talk about a typically used amended clause in contracts. And then I'll go into FIDIC conditions of construction 2017. I'll then talk about NEC 3 2013 and end off with JBCC 6.2, finalized in May 2018. After the contracts, I'll talk about insurance, talk about the different types of insurance, following the insurance claims process. I'll then discuss managing risks and talk about some legal considerations in construction contracts. And then I'll end off with a slide on how to avoid liability. Okay, as an introduction, we all know that rainfall is a normal occurrence in South Africa. So this presentation isn't about managing normal rainfall, it's about managing abnormal rainfall events. And you'll see as we're going through each of the contracts, how they stress that we're not talking about normal rainfall. This is something that the contractor can plan for in his program, and therefore we focus on abnormal events. We're also going to be focusing on specifically rainfall in this presentation, but it's not the only type of disruptive weather. And you'll see the terminology used in the contract is referring to weather and not only rainfall. So I've listed the types of contracts that we're going to go for. In general, the contracts all provide an extension of time should a contractor be able to substantiate his claim. But in some of the contracts, additional costs or P&Gs is also given. So the extension of time and the costs that are related to that may be provided for through the contract. But how is the damage covered? And this is typically done through insurance. So we'll talk about insurance and making sure that we have sufficient for the project. Also, the employer will have his own insurance cover requirements, which are then defined in the contract, but they may also be the party that's providing the cover. So we'll talk about that. And then different types of insurance cover, as I said, and talking about managing risk. So let's start with GCC 2015, third edition. So in this contract, the contractor can claim for extension of time and additional P&Gs for abnormal rainfall events. The contractor will need to prove that the abnormal nature of the rainfall event, or you need to prove that the event is not normal rainfall, and therefore he deserves the extension of time and additional P's and G's. So this is easier to do if there's a contract inclusion, such as the amended clause that I'll go through in the next slide, which provides statistical values in the contracts for the sites that can be used to compare the rainfall events to. So that's why I wanted to slip in this slide about a typical rainfall event. I'm just going to go through the equation here just to give some background on how a typical clause like this would work. So V is your extension of time. Then N is the actual number of days in a month where more than 10 millimeters fell in a rainfall event. So the W, the subset W refers to actual data, and the subset N refers to the statistical value. So you can see in this rainfall calculation, we're talking about the extreme event minus the normal rainfall. The second part of the formula is basically the average, the actual rainfall in millimeters that fell in the month minus the statistical value that you would expect to fall. And then that gets divided by the number of days in the month. So I just want to run through a very basic example because there's some aspects I want to highlight. So let's say in January, one would expect 5 rainfall events of more than 10 millimeters falling in those rainfall events and a total of 100 millimeters falling in that month. But then what was actually experienced was 10 extreme events and a total of 120 millimeters that fell. If we plug those values into the equation, you'll see 10 minus 5 plus 120 minus 100 over 20, and that results in 5 plus 1 equals 6. So the contractor would be due 6 days for the month of January. But what I wanted to point out here is that there were 10 days that extreme weather fell, but 5 of those could normally have been expected. So the contractor doesn't get extension of time for those 5 days. They get subtracted. And then this second part of this question of the equation basically results in 1 extra day. And that's to allow for any additional sort of delay, which took place after those 5 days. So that consequential impact does come through in this type of equation. So that's just one way of putting an amended clause in where you could compare your events to stats. But let's see how the other contracts manage it. So let's talk about FIDIC Conditions of Construction 2017, second edition. So in this, the contractor can claim for extension of time for unforeseeable rainfall events. So you can see that each of the contracts are using different terminology. For GCC, it was abnormal, and now we've got unforeseeable. Note that the clause is silent on additional payments due to delay caused by rainfall events. The employer is required to make climatic data available for the site. So this would typically be then included in the contract document, and or the contractor has the choice to use climatic data which is published in the country for the geographic location of the site to substantiate his claim. So it does become a little bit vague and wishy-washy if you don't have a specific clause in the contracts which might be based on a formula such as the one discussed before. Let's see how it's managed in the NEC 3 contract documents. So for this one, the contractor can claim an extension of time and define costs, but they need to be shown that they're reasonable and that they incurred due to excessive rainfall events. Once again, a different term used to explain how abnormal these events are. The contractor is required to prove the following to substantiate his claim. The value of the rainfall event by comparison with the weather data is shown to occur on average less frequently than once in 10 years. So once again, it's bringing in that statistical value as per how that amended clause also did so. The second bullet there, only the difference between the weather measurements and the weather, which the weather data show to occur less frequently than once in 10 years, is taken into account. So only the excessive part of the weather and not the normal section that one would expect. So very similar. And then under the JBCC contract, rain falls under the all-encompassing description of adverse weather conditions. Now, a fourth way to define these conditions. So in the event of adverse weather conditions, the contractor is entitled, in terms of the clause, to revision of the date for practical completion, but without a corresponding adjustment of the contract value. So in other words, they get the extension of time, but they don't get the extra money. Also, once again, the term of adverse weather conditions isn't defined in the contract and is left up to the principal agent's discretion, but it may be advisable to provide an amended clause. So that's why we're just saying one should consider in the contract that if you use an amended clause that makes it easy for the contractor to prove whether an event is excessive or not, it also makes it easy for smaller rainfall events to show that they do not count as excessive rainfall. So that's essentially the contracts and their extension of time. But as we said, the risk of the damage is not managed through the contract. In general, it would be managed through insurance. And as I said, there's different types of insurance. So I'll go through and define each of those. Contractors' all-risk insurance, which I'll break down a bit more. There's public liability insurance, where somebody from the public might be impacted by a rainfall event that falls on the site. And then also PI insurance might come into place if there is an impact from the designer's negligence in terms of his design not catering for extreme rainfall events. So if we just break down contractors' all-risk insurance a bit more, it should include direct contractors, materials and goods supplied by the employer, professional fees, temporary works, clearing away, and damage to adjoining property owned by the employer. Any supplementary insurance to cover against civil commotion, riots, strikes, etc. Natural support cover if applicable, and other insurances as agreed. So that's the general types of insurance. In terms of the claims process, it's very important to notify your broker as soon as the insurable event occurs. The next step then is to make sure that you document every aspect of the event so that all the information is available for them to assess the claim. Depending on the contract and policy wording, it may be required for the engineer on the project to certify the amount of damage for the claim. Going on to some contractual forms of agreement. So they usually have insurance requirements. The amount of cover must cover the total replacement value of the works. It must be stated in the contract who is responsible for the excess and the deductible, or the deductible. And this might sound obvious, but remember, it could be either the contractor or the employer who's the owner of the policy. So depending on who's the owner, whoever is going to be laying the claim and paying the excess must be defined in the contract. And then just a word of caution, construction insurance is a very highly specialized field, and we advise that the engineer shouldn't approve the policy of the insurance wording. It should be managed by a broker that has the specialist skills to define that policy wording. Second last bullet, all engineering work should comply with South African standards and regulations to prevent a negative outcome of the claim. So by complying with South African standards, you are meeting best practice and doing what would be considered as reasonable. In terms of regulations, these are required by South African law, and you can't contract out of these. So you should be meeting these in any case, but obviously, if you're not, there could be grounds to reject the claim. Last bullet, the insurer should have the right to pursue a third party for recovery of claim amounts paid out, and this is their right of subrogation. So just a note. Then let's talk about risk. So risk is generally the likelihood of an incident multiplied by its potential impact. And rain damage is no different. One should consider the risks that could result from rain damage, and the easiest way to mitigate against these measures, these risks, is to have a stormwater management plan in place for the project. And if the plan addresses the following risks, amongst others, it should be at least a good start for managing the risks of the project. Erosion, flooding, infiltration, any delays to the activities that could be expected, and safety issues such as slippery surfaces. Okay, so that essentially brings me to my last slide, which is the summary and some tips or actions on how to avoid liability. So the first one is thorough documentation. As said, keep records of all decisions, design changes, and communications in the project, including weather reports, obviously in these rain-related events. Then second, compliance with standards, following best practice and doing what is reasonable. Risk management, having a detailed stormwater management plan or comprehensive risk management plan applied to any other risks in the project. Acting professionally in line with CESA and EXA's code of conduct. Being an active supervisor on sites and providing clear direction and technical support to the team members. Ensuring that there is sufficient insurance cover for the project at initiation stage. Contractual clarity, making sure that all responsibilities and liabilities are clearly defined in the contract. And then lastly, clear communication, which allows expectations to be managed and issues to be promptly addressed. And that's the end of my presentation. Thanks, Wally.
Thank you, Charles, for so ably presenting on this topic and providing us with an understanding of the many risks and how to deal with them associated with managing rain events, as outlined in Practice Note PN 100. As previously mentioned, the presentation will be available on the CESA website. That brings us to our third presenter this afternoon, who will be Philip Boyens, who will address us on the new Practice Note PN 95, entitled Contract Price Adjustment in Construction. With Philip's over 25 years experience in our industry, he is well qualified to address us on this topic. More specifically, Philip is a professional civil engineer and the director of the Skip Engineering Group, CESA member firm. He's an active member of the CESA Quality Risk and Sustainability Management Committee, as well as the MSD or Management System Declarations Subcommittee. Philip is also the chairperson of the Gauteng CESA branch. So without further ado, I'm going to call on Philip. Over to you, Philip.
Thank you very much, Wally, for the kind introduction. And as Wally said, my name is Philip Boyens. I will be presenting on contract price adjustment and very specifically the way it is defined in the General Conditions of Contract 2015. The overview and outline of my presentation, I would touch on the contract price adjustment formula. I quickly look at the purpose of contract price adjustment and why it is important in construction contracts. I will show an outline of the presentation and then a note, as Wally said, all of these are practice notes. So this will be converted to a practice note and uploaded to the CESA website. The purpose of contract price adjustment is to ensure fair compensation for cost fluctuations during the project life cycle. It also allows for the adjustment of contract prices when things don't go according to plan or inflation runs away with the project and the cost of labor, materials, plant and fuel increases or decreases. The importance of the CPA on contracts is that it mitigates the financial risk for both contractor and employer. It ensures the project viability despite economic challenges. It maintains the contractor's profitability and financial health, and it encourages accurate and competitive bidding. And specific on that last bullet, if the contract price adjustment is in the contract data and it's applied to the contract, that encourages the contractors to not inflate or deflate their rates to try and have the competitive advantage, but rather price according to market-related values, and then rest assured that if things change in the medium and long term, that there will be adjustment made to the rates and finally the payment certificate of the contractor. The outline of the presentation would be to look at the contract price adjustment formula that is defined in the GCC, what all the symbols and meanings mean, then the calculation of the so-called AC, which is the amount at which the monthly statement is adjusted. Then I will describe an example calculation, show all the indices that's used in the example. In the example, we'll first determine the ratios for ease of calculation and then determine the factor, and thereafter use the factor to calculate the contract price adjustment. And then lastly, I've included the URL references to the online documents and also a place where you can order from the CESA website your GCC contract if you don't have one. The calculation of the CPA factor, which is used to determine the adjustment of each monthly statement by an amount that either increases or decreases the amount based on the indices. So it could happen that fuel comes down and then previous months it went up, and then obviously it could be a negative impact. Let me find my pointer. So the contract price adjustment factor is calculated by just substituting all those values in there. X, as well as the values of A, B, C, and D are all determined or specified in the contract data, which the contractors do not fill in most cases. It's defined by the principal agent on the contract. X is the portion of the adjustment value that is not subject to adjustment. And then the values of L, P, M, and F is the various indices for labor, plant, materials, and fuel. And there's various places that you can find it. At one stage, the contractors also published the indexes, but it's more readily available from Stats SA website, and the three publications that is used would be the P141, P142, as well as P151. The base month, again, specified in the contract data, it's usually the bid closing month, but bear in mind, if there is a delay between bid closing and final appointment of the selected contractor, then obviously the base month will need adjustment. And again, that needs to be defined, and then that is fixed for the duration of the contract. And then T would then be the current month in which you would be doing your certificate. And you will see in the example, I have used January 2024 for the base month, and the certificate month as March 2024. And this formula you will find on page 86 of the General Conditions of Contract, 3rd edition. Then the calculation of the AC amount, which is the adjustment of the relevant monthly statement by the contract price adjustment factor, is made up of all these values. So T would be the value of the work that is executed to date. From that, you remove the prime cost sums and other amounts. You also remove the day works that was done at fixed rates, then the day work amounts, and then also any special materials that was granted, and then also all previous amounts of contract price adjustment. Will then leave you with the AC amount, and this formula is also published on page 86. This is the example calculation. Just to make life easier, I used round numbers, and I've also used a fairly small space. So we assume it's the certificate month is in March. The base month would be January 2024, taken for this example. The contract value was 1 million, of which 1 million is certified now in March. The coefficients as well as X is specified in the contract data as 0.5, 0.25, 0.2, 0.4, 0.15, and then this portion that's not subject to adjustment would be the 0.15. And again, as I said, this is determined upfront and defined in the contract data. Then we use the indices from Stats SA, and the steps would be to first calculate the ratios and then substitute that into the CPAF formula, and then apply the factor with the AC amount. What I've indicated on this slide and the following slides is where the indices are being extracted. So the labor component is extracted from Stats SA publication 141 out of table A, and it is read for Gauteng. Obviously, I didn't specify in the example that it's based in Gauteng. And the base month is January, so we get the base month value of 112.2 read from that column over there. The same with the current month. We're using the March PDF that's uploaded to the website. We look there, we take it from Gauteng, and there we get the 114. Now, what is important to note in this, and I've extracted that little section there, is here where there's the green one on both of these sets of stats available from Stats SA. It's important to look at the index month. So intentionally, I chose the more easy example. You will notice that the index month for both these sets of data are December 2021. And if we go to the next one, the plant, again, same process, table 4 from publication 151. Construction plant for January, for the base month, we determined 100.5. And then for the current month, 100.6. And again, it's important to make sure that the indexes are both the same. Otherwise, you get a skewed result. And then the same for the material that was used. And this is now coming from a different, it's still from the same publication. And again, then lastly for fuel. And the fuel also is the base month for both sets of data the same. If you find, especially on contracts that run over various years, it's got extensive duration, then you will find that at one point, the stats get reweighted. So there will be a jump from the 1 month to the next month set. That number there will be different and the base will reset. And that will skew all your indices. And to fix that, you will have to work backwards, applying a ratio to find your base month and then make sure that your calculations are correct and don't give a skewed result. So for the ease of the calculation, we determine the various factors, the labor, the plant, the material, and the fuel ratios. According to the GCC, you must round your CPAF to, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's the fourth, yeah, to the fourth decimal. So I'm just showing to make sure that the calculation pulls through correctly. I've shown all the decimals and substituting all this into these spots, then you do the calculation, and then that is your contract price adjustment factor, which then gets multiplied with the amount of money that is being used. And for this very straightforward example, we are using a million rand times that value gives you the CPA amount, which is then added to that month's payment certificate. The online references for the documents, if you would like to order your GCC, you can get it from the CESA website. And please note that the new version of the GCC is also available on the CESA website. It's still in draft. It's not been finalized yet. Currently known as the GCC 2023, which will most probably be published later in the year. However, the good news is the CPA formula and that section of the contract document remains exactly the same. So there's nothing new to learn over there. And then the various links to I've just given the link to the base month. I see there's a small mistake for January, but it's the base month PDF. And then you will then obviously look for your current month. And then lastly, a note on the information that's published by Stats SA. There's usually an embargo placed on the publication of the information, which is approximately 30 days. So you might have to work your CPA slightly behind the payment certificate intervals, but you will find a way of working around that. And then, Wally, that would be my last slide. And thank you for the opportunity to present this topic to you. And over to you, Wally.
Thank you very much, Philip. That was great. And what I liked was that you really illustrated and explained the formula and the factors. And very importantly, I think, is where to find the information. So that's great. And of course, your presentation will be available on the website as well as the recording. So those who want to see the web references again can do that. So thank you, Philip. And then at this stage in the proceedings, I'd like to pose the questions that the delegates have submitted. That's you, the delegates, to the presenters for their response. We are well ahead of schedule, so presenters, you need not rush your answers or anything. Okay, so I see we have 6 questions. The first one from Walter Moilwa. He says, what happens when a contractor decides to not follow engineers' plans and follow the architect's plans instead? Is that a breach? And what is the solution moving forward? And he just mentions electrical engineers' plans. I think this might be for Francis. I'm not sure. Is it for you, Francis?
Yeah, I imagine it is, Wally. Thank you. So I suppose if the architect's plans are wrong and the contractor's building something that is incorrect when compared with the consulting engineer's drawings, that is certainly a breach. I mean, so yes, the contractor is required to follow the design on the drawings given to him and not the architect's drawings. So I would agree that that is a breach.
Thank you very much, Francis. Then James Lochner says, how do you deal with consequential delays as a result of the abnormal weather? And I'm sure that's for Charles. Charles?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. In my presentation, I showed how the rainfall formula that we've given gives some allowance for consequential damage, but I think that it depends very much on the site conditions and how much rain fell. I think if you have a very significant rainfall, and conditions are much wetter than the 3 or 4 days that the formula shows, I guess the contractor would be able to substantiate that he's been delayed by including all the details in his claim. So I guess I would say that for consequential damage, which is more significant than what the formula shows, that they should still try and claim and substantiate it in their claim, see if they can motivate it that way.
Thank you very much, Charles. There's another one here for you. It's from Terence O'Flaherty. Charles, the division by 20, is that not to account for consequential rain day? The 20 millimeters of rain, therefore, causing a consequential day. Are we free to change the number? And he's got 10 to suit specific site conditions.
If I understand the question correctly, there's 2 parts to the question. So the first part on the rainfall calculation, we divide the amount of rain in a month by 20. And the reason why I used 20 was just because I was assuming 20 working days in that calendar month. So that specific formula was based by dividing the working days in the month. If the contractor is working every day, that number could go up to 30, or if it's, say, the last month or the first month and they have to pro rata, that could go down to 10. So it really depends on the situation. But also, I mean, there's different formulas that can be used. This is just one that's given as an example. And there's a lot more information on how to use this specific clause in the practice notes. I just didn't include all that information in the presentation. So I would refer you there. But the second part of that question, in terms of, I said that the excessive rainfall days would be days where more than 10 millimeters fell. That could change as well, depending on the site circumstances. If you're in a site that has a lot of rainfall and drainage conditions are good, and a 20 millimeter rainfall, say, per day doesn't really impact the works, then you could change that number to 20, and then excessive rainfall days would only be days greater than 20. But you would then have to modify your stats that you include in your contracts to be based on days that are on average greater than 20 miles, not greater than 10 miles. Hope that answers it.
Thank you, Charles. It seems everyone's bothered by the weather because the next two questions are yours. This is from Anonymous. If using GCC 2015, can a contractor claim extension of time due to inclement weather, which is based on a formula and is due if he completes the contract before the completion date?
Yeah, I think I can start on this one, and perhaps maybe Francis and Philip can back me up. If the contractor submits a claim for extension of time due to a rainfall event, and the engineer awards the claim, the practical completion date gets pushed out by the amounts that's in the claim, and the additional P's and G's is also increased accordingly. If the contractor still finishes by the original due date, he's still due all the P's and G's that are due to him within the contract. His earlier finishing is basically his prerogative. That's how I understand it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Charles. Sorry. And then sorry, I just meant to look at. I took the questions down to look at Francis and Philip to see if they wanted to comment. I'm not sure if they do. Francis?
No, I think Charles' response is correct. Thanks, Wally.
Okay, thank you. And I see Philip nodding. So I take it he's in agreement with you, Charles. So what an excellent answer. All right. The questions are coming in fast and furious. This is from Raj Ramcharan. What do you do if V is negative in your rain events? Amended clause example.
Yeah, that is dealt with in the more information included in the practice note. So what we'd want to do is we would keep that claim as a running tally throughout the construction period, because you might get 6 days in January, 3 days in say February, 2 days in March, and so the extension of time is going to increase. So the way that it's dealt with in terms of negative values, this specific clause, if I remember the wording 100% correct, the negative days are meant to be subtracted from the accumulated total. So obviously in the drier periods, you might have less rainfall events, which means even lower rainfall events than the average, which means your V would calculate out to be negative. And therefore the contractor has a much higher production rate in that specific month than he would have allowed for based on normal rainfall amounts. But the end goal of the rainfall calculation and the contractor is not to put the contractor in a worse position than when he was starting the contract. So if the total calculation at the end of the contract is a negative number, then in general, there's just no impact on the contract. But that's basically, I think, how this formula is based. And I should probably just say a disclaimer that, it really depends on your contract and what formula you used and the conditions. And what we're saying here is, I guess, just a reasonable response. But, one should perhaps speak to a legal consultant if they're managing very complicated projects. Just a disclaimer.
Thank you, Charles. Raj had a second question. And you may have answered it, I'm not sure. How does one manage consequential delays for abnormal rain events?
Yeah, I think that was managed in the first response that I gave. Just one thing I didn't point out in the presentation is that your clause should also state how standing time is going to be managed. I think the consequential delays are usually plant that's standing around because the conditions are too wet to work. So whether that standing time is then included or excluded should be clearly stated in the contract.
Thank you, Charles. Okay. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Here's a question for Philip. Warrant Mark says, good afternoon. What is the shortest contract period where the CPA is typically applied? And he says, thank you.
Thanks,
So,
Wally.
Philip, yeah.
Thank you, Wally. Warrant, I think that it really depends on you as the principal agent and your client and the contractor and the contract that you are managing. But they are according to the GCC, there's no specific minimum or maximum, and it would really depend on you. Just looking at the example that I've did in the presentation, on R1 million from January to March, given those coefficients, the change in the contract value was only 20,000 rand. So I think it would be dependent on the effort that everybody would like to put in. So it is no point in applying on a 2-month project CPA because there's not going to be much change. But I would say if you go over 6 months, 6 to 12 months would be a good average. But again, that would be decided in your company and firm and together with your client and the contractor. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Philip. Then we've got it back to the weather channel. We've got a question from Tim van Oosten. He said, rain delays. Contractor would like to work month specific and not a cumulative total for the entire project duration. Do the rain delays in the contract run monthly over the entire period? And he's using the GCC contract. So, Charles, if you wouldn't mind answering that, please.
Yeah, I think I think in the projects I've been involved in, we've always run over the total period of the project because there's some months that accumulate and some months that subtract. So I think the months that subtract, if using a similar rainfall formula to what I've shown, if you're doing it month by month, then you're going to push out the date for practical completion. You're going to push out that in positive months, and then in negative months, you're going to bring it back, and it doesn't quite then make sense. So it really depends on what formula you're using and whether that formula could result in a negative answer. And if you're using a contract that doesn't result in negative values, then it would be fine to do it month by month because then you would only ever push out the practical completion date. That's how I would respond. It very much depends on the contract and the formula being used.
Thank you very much, Charles. And come to our last question, which is for Francis, I think. It's from Tandom. It says, in the case that the specifications are not provided for the contractor, and a clause in the bill of quantities that says all similar materials has been used, how do we deal with substandard materials forming the base for termination?
Oh, thanks, Wally. So that's a good question. Obviously, first prize is to have all the material specified in the contract document so that you avoid this trap. But on the other hand, and I'm sure the lawyers would have a field day on this, it would come to the definition of all similar materials. So if you've specified, let's just say UPVC pipe, and they give you something that's not of the same standard as your material specified, then of course the material is substandard. So as long as there's something to compare it with, then you can make a judgment about whether it meets the specification or not. So I think that's the important thing. So if it's what you're comparing it to, because presumably the BOQ won't just say or similar material, it'll say use this and this and this or similar material, and then he might bring the similar material, and then you judge it against what you've called up in the item, and then you can certainly throw it out if it doesn't meet the standard of the original material. Carl and Phil, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Thanks, Francis. Yeah, I think the or similar usually in our bill of quantities are either followed by sounds or approved. So it just depends as you opened your comment that it's better to have it described as best as possible to avoid any vagueness. But happy.
Hey, thank you, Philip and Francis. Thank you for that. Tim van Oosten just had a comment that he agrees with your opinion, Charles. His problem is he just has a contractor who does not agree with that interpretation. So it's just a comment. Sorry about that, Tim. And then Rob Archibald from SMEC says, in the CPA calculation, so this is for you, Philip, in the CPA calculation, how would you advise what value to use for X?
Thanks, Wally. Rob, we tend, this is company based. Our company have decided over years of experience that we would like to use 0.015, 15%. If that is not available and you cannot find a value, GCC do actually make one available. It says that if it's not defined, this portion shall be 0.1, which is 10%. So according to GCC, the minimum value should be 10%. And we are using 15%. And I think it's again case by case, depending on the project and your client's needs. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Philip. Then we've got these questions are just sneaking in at the end here. We've got one from Tamay, which is for Francis, I think. Yeah. For the works designed by the contractor, like temporary works, can you terminate on the basis of poor material if this ultimately affects the works? So, Francis?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. So I would think that if the works is to be incorporated in the permanent works, then there would be a case to reject it. So you'd have to reject it first, obviously, and go through the process before terminate. But I mean, I think that's the key question: is the impact of the temporary works, what impact does it have on the permanent works? And if it's being incorporated into the permanent works, and it will have an impact on the quality of the permanent works, I would think then you would have grounds for rejecting the materials or the works.
Thank you, Francis. And with the permission of the meeting, we're very well ahead on time. I'd just like to ask the presenters a question.
Sorry,
yeah,
Wally, there's I think Philip raised his hand on the last question.
Sorry, Philip, would you like to contribute?
Wally, no, not. I want to just point out. I see there's a question in the comment section. I don't know how that sneaked over there. That we could also maybe take. Should I read it?
Yeah, please. I don't see it.
How is excessive rain during the contractor's break over Christmas dealt with regarding an extension of time claim? That's from Peter. I think that should be for Shaul.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, our clause in the practice note says that public holidays and December break should be taken into consideration in the formula, but it doesn't quite say how it should be taken into consideration. And I guess that to me implies that you should consider if the rainfall event is impacting either the quality of the work in terms of is it damaging the works, or is it pushing out the practical completion dates? And I think if it has the chance to push out the practical completion date, then I believe the contractor is due to have that period included. If there doesn't seem to be an impact on the end dates, then I would say it's a non-working time, and therefore you would just be following the motions, which I think is against the spirit of the contract. So my view, in the case of an example, if the contractor was building a dam and it rained the whole of the December period, and now he's got a dam that he has to pump out before he can carry on the works, he's clearly been impacted in terms of his program. So I would say, then in a project like that, clearly you would have to consider that period. But it comes down to, I think, being what's fair and interpreting the events in the framework of the project and the site constraints.
Thank you, Shaul. Okay. Thanks. So what I'd like to say is we've got time to ask the presenters, and I did give them a little bit of warning beforehand, is if they can just each of them give us, the audience and me, a takeaway point, sort of a highlight from their presentations. What do they consider amongst the most important aspects of their presentations? And we could maybe just follow the order of the presentations. So Francis, would you like to give us a nugget?
Okay, thanks, Wally. So I mean, I think in the current situation in South Africa, we are seeing a number of contractors winning contracts when perhaps which they're not competent to execute, and this is causing a lot of problem on sites for the client and for the consulting engineer, for the engineer, so I think we often get dragged into the dispute process in these cases. So we're trying to say, well, you haven't started the works, or you aren't proceeding with the right pace, or your material, as per the case I gave, is substandard. And really, I think that what this practice note illustrates is that in these cases, it can be better. And I won't say it's always better or how often it's better, but it can be better to terminate as early as you can, and you'll save everyone a lot of heartache. So I think that's the key message, and I think the example we gave is a prime one where the client in the end it cost them a lot of money. They still don't have the project, and they're not very happy with their consultant. So but obviously you need to, as Shaul said earlier, you need to consult someone who has a good contractual understanding of the situation before you take whichever course you take. Thanks, Wally.
Thank you, Francis. That was a very nice point you made. Shaul, do you have a nugget for us?
Yeah, and if I may, I just comment after what Francis said. I've never been through a termination process on a project myself, but I have spoken to others in the industry, and they say you really need to make sure you follow the process as accurately as possible when terminating a project, because if you do the termination incorrectly, you could put your clients at risk from the contractor.
Sorry, Charles seems to be frozen there for a moment. We can't blame load shedding, eh?
No.
No. Philip, do you want to give us your nugget while Charles attends to his connection problem?
Yes, let's go for it. Thank you, Wally. I think I'm gonna take points from Charles' presentation. He's got his points on the very last slide, and I would say it's a combination of point number 1, point number 7, and point number 8, which is thorough documentation, contractual clarity, and communication. And the combination of that will result in any of the topics that we've been discussing, making it much easier if you need to take action or defend your stance as the professional on the project. And specifically in the case of the CPA, making sure that you include the various ratios and specific the reference to use for the indexes in your contractual data, so that it's clear. Nobody can argue with the formula and the calculation method. That's all from my side. Wally, thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. Charlotte, are you back with us? Sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry, I somehow dropped off. So yeah, I was just ending off that point, and I heard what Philip said, and I was going to say pretty much the same thing. The two important things to me was documents everything and communicates clearly. And I think if you get those two things right, most of the difficulties you have in the project are going to be resolved.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. Okay, so I'll just do the closing remarks on that now. We have come to the end of the Q&A session, and well, I hope all the questions have been addressed. I think they were. Thanks to the presenters keeping very strictly to their time. Thank you. And just want to say that you're welcome to email me at wally@cesa.co.za. If you have any questions that weren't answered during the webinar or you think about later, and we will see that they are answered. We'd also like to invite you to submit any comments or suggestions you may have regarding our webinars, such as this one, with a view to improving them and making them more useful. And I just want to add, that our practice notes are living documents. So you're welcome to submit comments and constructive text or something that we can enhance our practice notes. And then also you're welcome to suggest topics that you'd like addressed at future webinars. And again, just send me your comments and suggestions. That's wally@cesa.co.za. And then regarding CPD, delegates registered with CESA may claim 0.2 CPD points for attending this webinar. And we do that according to our webinar attendance list. And for ease of administration, CPD certificates will be sent to delegates that have completed the survey. And so I'll tell you about the survey. So in closing, I would like to kindly request delegates to complete the satisfaction survey, which is the one that results in you getting your CPD certificate. It's going to pop up on your screen or when you exit the webinar. The purpose of the survey is to provide us with your satisfaction ratings or feedback that will enable us to improve our future webinars. And then this is a new point in our webinars. We just added this, that kindly allow us 2 or 3 days to upload the presentations before requesting them. This includes the uploading of the practice notes themselves, because it's done by volunteers and they hard pressed for time, and we just have to finalize the formatting of the practice notes before we upload them. And then, right, sorry, I I see we've got one more question here. I don't know, we've got a bit of time. Can we just answer it? Let me see. It's from Nokutulaka. Okay. It says, may we kindly have access to recordings? I joined rather late. My apologies. Sorry about that. So that's essentially what I'm saying is that the recordings will be available on the CESA website, on the YouTube section, and the presentations and the guidelines. But both of them, just give us about a week or so, and the practice notes themselves, to upload them to the website, get everything running smoothly before you start writing to us and requesting them, or hopefully not even complaining about them. And then colleagues and friends of CESA, we have reached the end of the webinar, and I would like to sincerely thank our three presenters for availing of their time and for sharing their knowledge and thoughts with us. It's a lot of work. And of course, a big thank you to you, our delegates, for supporting CESA and attending this practice note webinar. And with that, thank you again for your attendance and participation. I would like to wish you a good day further. It's goodbye. Thank you.